There are moments in history when the world does not change suddenly, but begins to feel different in a way that is difficult to explain, where nothing appears entirely stable and yet nothing has fully collapsed. The year 2026 seems to carry that atmosphere, where conversations across countries, across media, and across everyday life are slowly turning towards a question that no one can answer with certainty, yet no one is able to ignore. As tensions deepen in West Asia and as headlines grow more intense and unpredictable, a quiet unease begins to spread, not only through political systems and financial markets, but through the minds of ordinary people who begin to sense that something larger may be taking shape. This feeling is not created by a single event, but by a series of signals that appear disconnected on the surface, yet seem to point in a similar direction when seen together. When such uncertainty begins to grow, the human mind responds in a very familiar way, where it starts to search for patterns, for signs, and for some form of meaning that can bring order to what feels unstable. It is in such moments that the past returns with unusual force, and names that belong to distant history begin to reappear in present conversations, carrying with them a strange sense of relevance. Figures like Baba Vanga and Nostradamus begin to be discussed once again, not because they have spoken recently, but because the present moment gives their words a new kind of weight. Baba Vanga, whose life ended decades ago, continues to be associated with interpretations that seem to connect her statements with major global events, and whether these connections arise from genuine foresight or from retrospective interpretation, they continue to influence the way people think about the future. There are interpretations circulating today that suggest she pointed towards a turning point around this period, where conflict emerging from West Asia could expand beyond its initial boundaries and begin to affect a much larger part of the world. What gives this idea its strength is not the prophecy alone, but the way it appears to resonate with what is already unfolding, where tension is rising, alliances are tightening, and responses are becoming more calculated and cautious. At the same time, Nostradamus is often brought into this discussion, where his writings are interpreted to suggest a period of conflict marked by intensity and duration. And though his words do not offer clear timelines or specific details, they create a framework within which people begin to imagine how events might unfold. When one looks closely, however, a deeper understanding begins to emerge, because neither of these figures provides certainty in the way modern thinking expects, and their words do not define exact outcomes. They suggest direction, they evoke movement, and they leave space for interpretation, and it is within that space that human anxiety begins to grow. The real question, therefore, is not whether these prophecies are true, but why they return with such force whenever the world enters a state of uncertainty. Because what they reflect is not the future itself, but the condition of the present, where the mind, faced with unpredictability, begins to search for signs that something larger is already written. At the same time, the actual movement of the world is not shaped by ancient words, but by decisions being made in the present, where diplomacy, economic strategy, military restraint, and political leadership determine the direction in which events unfold. What is happening today in regions of tension is the result of choices, responses, and interactions between nations, and these are processes that continue to evolve in real time. Yet the presence of prophetic narratives creates a powerful psychological effect, because when people begin to believe that conflict is inevitable, it changes the way they perceive events, and what might have been seen as avoidable begins to feel unavoidable. This shift in perception is important because belief can influence response, and response can influence outcome. When fear begins to shape thinking, actions tend to follow that direction, and this is how uncertainty can gradually move towards escalation. At the same time, there is another dimension to this moment that often goes unnoticed, because beyond fear and speculation, there is also awareness. People are observing more closely, questioning more deeply, and becoming more conscious of how fragile global balance can be, and this awareness carries within it the possibility of a different response. History has shown that moments of tension do not always lead to conflict, and that there are points where decisions can alter the direction entirely, where restraint replaces reaction, and where understanding prevents escalation. The future is not fixed, and it is not written in advance, but shaped continuously through the interaction of human choices, circumstances, and awareness. What makes this moment significant is not only the possibility of conflict, but the opportunity to recognize how quickly perception can move towards fear, and how important it becomes to remain grounded in clarity. Because while the mind searches for patterns in prophecy, the world itself moves through action, and the difference between the two determines how events unfold. As 2026 continues to unfold, the atmosphere may remain uncertain, and questions may continue to arise without clear answers. Yet, within that uncertainty lies a space where the future is still being shaped. And perhaps the most important question is not whether a prophecy will come true, but whether humanity will act in a way that makes such prophecies irrelevant. Because beyond all speculation, beyond all prediction, what remains constant is the fact that the future is not something we wait for, but something that is being created in every moment through the choices that are made. And in that understanding, the sense of helplessness begins to fade, because what appears as uncertainty from one perspective becomes possibility from another. And within that possibility lies the direction that the world will ultimately take.